Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. I'm really excited to have our very next guest. I have virtually in front of me Cristina, who is a psychologist and eating disorder specialist, and she is here to shed some light on the very unfortunate symptoms, diagnoses that people are walking around with on a regular basis, whether they know it or don't know it. And we're going to talk about strategies to heal and to become aware and to get help. So Cristina, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tony. I'm really excited.
You're so welcome. I'm so grateful that you're here. I would love for you to start by introducing yourself by answering 3 questions, which are who you are, what you do, and more importantly, why you do what you do.
Okay. Well, like you said, Cristina Castagnini. I'm a licensed psychologist in California and a certified eating disorder specialist. I'm currently in private practice and also have a podcast, which you were on, called Behind the Bite. And that's kind of my passion project. So I like to spread information about eating disorders and body image issues. And why I do it, I also had an eating disorder when I was younger. And I actually didn't want to specialize in eating disorders. I thought, okay, I don't want to fall into that, I guess, the stereotype of the wounded healer who brings their stuff into the session. So I didn't actually want to do that at all. But I found that I was really connecting with people when I was in session, and they didn't really have to say a whole lot. And I really understood, because I think once you have an eating disorder, it's just very unique. The mindset is very unique. The behaviors, the thoughts. And I really thought back to my own treatment and thought, I never had a treatment provider who had walked that walk and been there. And I really think if I had, my treatment would have been maybe short or different. I'm not sure. But, and I also really think that it's helpful to give people hope, being that I'm recovered, to break that myth of, the myth that's out there that if you have an eating disorder, you don't ever fully recover. And I like to give that message that, yes, you can fully recover, and be able to say, like, look, I've done it. So can you. So that's why I do it. Amazing.
So if you don't mind, I would love to go a little bit deeper into the type of eating disorder that you had, and then talk about a little bit more about the types of eating disorders that you treat, because there's many of them and varying degrees. And we were just, even before we started recording, I'm like, wait, orthorexia is not in the DSM? Like, I was like, wait, what? I kind of thought it was, but it really isn't. And it's just like, I feel like it's important to also talk about, the specific criteria for the certain diagnoses that you most frequently treat, but then also maybe shed some light on some of these disorders that we, might classify as disordered eating, not necessarily an eating disorder, and like the varying degrees between the two.
Sure. So it's interesting because people have asked me, like, well, which one did you have? And as I think back, I really believe I had them all at one point. Started off with a diet, wanting to lose weight, and it just morphed into full-blown anorexia. So to start out, like, for sure, that's where it went. And I could not sustain the restrictive nature of that. And so I was like, okay, so how do I eat and figure this out? So I really, my eating disorder morphed into bulimia for sure. Where I was eating, but then was like, how do I compensate? And my way of compensating was all sorts of things. People I think compensation is just self-induced vomiting, which I did do, but I also did over-exercising, which at the time I didn't think was compensation. I just thought I was being quote unquote healthy. I also did laxatives. I did all sorts of things. I mean, you name it, I tried it. I didn't realize it was bulimia at the time. I just thought I was, I don't know, dieting and failing. But then over time, I also did my share of binge eating without the compensation. So, I did everything. I think this was a long time of my life, years. So I think if I had been with a provider at different points in time, they probably would have diagnosed me differently.
Right. And what were the first few steps that you took to heal and to get help?
I remember when I was younger, I had asked my parents if I could see a nutritionist because I just wanted somebody to tell me how to eat. And I thought this was going to be the holy grail. Like, okay, they're going to tell me how to eat, what to eat. I'm failing at dieting. Like that was my first attempt. And that was not treatment. And I remember seeking treatment and I would have like one session and I blip out. It was too much. I could feel too vulnerable or, there were moments along the way and I was just a horrible patient. To be honest, I was really bad. I did not want to open up. I didn't want to share. There's so much shame with eating disorders.
Right.
But what finally got me to do it was I had a moment where I passed out and it really freaked me out. And it was at that point where I realized my body is not going to survive this if I keep going. So it got real.
Yeah. So you had your breaking point and then you decided, all right, that enough is enough. And so when you're working with a client, you feel, it sounds like you feel like your personal experience really helps you help them.
Yeah. I mean, again, I am very mindful and I was very careful before I became certified or even really took on this as my specialty that I don't make my experience theirs. Right. I relate, but but there's certain things about an eating disorder that I think most people can just say, yes, this is the thought pattern, or these are the things that most people, like you can identify an eating disorder thought versus a non-eating disorder thought pretty clearly.
Right. Definitely. All right. So I would love for you to speak to kind of when you're working with a client, do you find that their diagnosis is related to another either mental health condition or another maybe trauma or stress going on in their life? Or have you just found that like there can just be people with eating disorders and their eating disorders on their own? Like, what are the more common times when you see eating disorders develop?
It is across the board. People have asked like, what's typical? And I have to say this is not typical. I think that the myth used to be out there. It was like, preteen or teenage Caucasian females, of a certain, socioeconomic status. That's not the norm. It's all over the board. Yes, there's people who have a history of trauma. There's people who don't. There's people who, have a genetic predisposition. There's people who don't. There's people who have family stressors or don't. It's, people of all ages, genders, socioeconomic statuses, like sexual orientations. I mean, eating disorders don't discriminate. And certainly there are also people who have major depressive disorder or anxiety disorders or comorbid illnesses along with their eating disorder, but not everybody. So I can't say it's like this, hey, this is the typical. There's no typical for sure.
Okay. So it sounds like it's very true that anyone can have one, when it comes to the healing process, do you think the healing process is the same or is it different based on the root cause, would you say?
And again, this is why it's not manualized treatment, right? And even if you look at eating disorder treatment centers, like higher level of care, they vary. There's some that specialize with people who got a trauma history or binge eating disorder, or, there's different needs for different people. Sometimes people have substance abuse with their eating disorder, I do think there's that need for there to be, I look at each person as an individual and say, what's going on with this person? And it's not you can't ever like pinpoint one thing and say it's because of that you have it. And if somebody's really looking to figure out like, oh, that's the root cause, it's like they're not going to find it because it's a perfect storm of lots of things that happened over time.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So I think it's clear to the listeners that anybody can have an eating disorder. It can come from many things. And I also think what I'm kind of hearing from you is like, instead of trying to figure out kind of why you have it and like the cause of it, just to start the healing, just start healing it, because, you know, anybody can have it and just start healing it. So what would you advise for somebody listening? I know it's not so easy to say on a podcast, but I would love to be able to give maybe 2 to 3 tips to our listeners of if they are struggling with any of the eating disorders that you've just named, what are some steps they can take towards healing? I get this a lot, and I know this is a hard question because I get this in my DMs and I'm like, I really wish I could answer you in a message,
Right.
but like it's a process. Like you can't really, you know, I can give you tips and strategies, but it, you know, anyways, with that said, to your best ability, I know it's a hard question. What are maybe like 2 to 3 things somebody can do to start healing, whether it be their relationship with food or, you know, minimizing the intensity of the eating disorder?
Sure. One thing I tell everybody is get rid of your scale if you're weighing yourself a lot. The scale is not helpful, useful. It's going to continually make the external numbers, sizes on your clothes, the number on the scale. That's number one. I think you can get rid of the scale. That's great. I know that's a hard thing for people. Number 2, if you can find somebody you trust and you can start opening up about what's going on, I think that's a great first step because you're only as sick as your secrets. And if you can really find that one person, that's really helpful. Maybe they can help be your support person in finding a therapist, or maybe they can be the person when you're feeling like you want to engage in a behavior, or you're really having a bad body image day, just somebody that you can turn to. Because you have to pick that person wisely. Not everyone is going to be supportive, and that's not, you know, don't take that personally. Not everyone can understand eating disorders. They're complicated. The other thing I would suggest is get off social media. I mean, I've never seen anything. I mean, I think it's changing. There are some great Instagrams and some, you know, some great like people doing some good work in terms of like spreading good messages. But I think that there are the majority of people claiming like wellness and health and quote unquote healthy eating that are disguised as more eating disorder behaviors. And so it's really hard to tease out what's what. So I would say take a little social media break.
Definitely. I couldn't agree with you more. I had to write down as you were typing because you said something that was so profound that I feel like I've never heard before, but like I've heard it before, but I don't even think you realized when you said it, was you're only as strong as your secrets. Can you elaborate on that? When you say I think that's what you said. That's what I wrote down. Oh. When you said you're only as strong as your secrets, meaning like you have to like let people know what's going on. Is that what you meant?
Well, I'm sorry if it wasn't clear. It's only as sick as your secrets.
Only as sick. I was going to say, that doesn't make any sense. Now that I'm like reading out, you're only as sick as your secrets. I'm rewriting that. Only as sick as your secrets. I'm like, it sounded good at the time. And then, sorry, my brain's like, yeah, I was like, wait, yeah, you're only as sick. That makes more sense. You're only as sick. So can you elaborate on that? Because I thought that was really, really interesting.
Well, so, you know, eating disorders have a lot of shame and embarrassment, and there's so much healing that happens and so much transformation in therapy that happens when people start to open up about what behaviors they're doing, what they're thinking, what's going on. Because, for instance, like I'll give an example. I run groups, and there's these moments I've seen on people's faces when someone will open up about a behavior they're doing. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. Like, you do that too. It's like there's this relief of like the shame is like released or something. So, you know, I have people say like, oh yeah, I drive around and I get all this fast food and I binge on it in the car. And then I'll go and find like a dumpster and like toss it away before I go home. And like, if other people do that too, and they've never told anybody, it's something they feel so ashamed of and embarrassed of. It's like this, I even hear like audible, like sighs of relief, like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. Or like, it's something like that, where it's just like, then they can feel more open to sharing or opening up about things they're doing. And it's just this like relief of like not holding on to all of these things that they feel so awful about.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like shame. Can we speak about shame? Because I feel like that's what gets people stuck in like the binge restrict cycle a lot of the times, or that's what prevents people from speaking up and getting help. And like, I would love for you to explain like shame on a, like a psychological level, like how that is not helpful.
Well, I mean, sometimes it can start young, right? So a lot of times people, when they're kids, they have all these big emotions and feelings, right? And they're shamed for it. It's like, oh, shut up, or, don't feel that way, or how you're feeling is wrong, or, they're made to feel like if they're sad or crying, they get shamed. Like that's a bad thing. They're bad for feeling that way or emoting. So they learn to stuff their feelings down. They learn like, if I cry or I'm sad or I'm expressing myself, like something's wrong with me. These feelings are wrong. I feel ashamed for being myself, being honest, being open. And so that can sometimes be like the impetus for a lot of this, right? It's, oh gosh, when I have these big emotions, when I'm expressing myself, that's bad. I can't do that. And so, turning to the food to cope, to comfort themselves, to numb out, instead of actually expressing what's going on inside. That start young.
I feel like you just said something that I think that I don't even think people realize I think it's more on like even a subconscious level, like about like not feeling like you can be yourself. I feel like we live in a world where people are feel like they have to wear a mask, and it is hard to show up and to be who you are because of fear of judgment. And so I feel like subconsciously, some people might be doing it, they have a bad day, they feel judged, so then they turn to food. But I think sometimes it might be like underlying, like, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I know working with clients, it's like when you get to the root of why they're binging, specifically with binge eating, I find it's really like they're not enjoying any aspect of their life. They're not proud of where they're at in life. There's like something missing of like, whether it be fun or excitement or feeling like they have a purpose, right? It's usually like something bigger. And I think what you said before about not feeling like you can be yourself, is very common, I find, in binge eating disorder, but it's also, I'm sure, in other eating disorders too.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing, is like this idea I hear a lot too, is like, oh, I can only be happy when I hit this number or this size, or, if I look a certain way. It's like, like right now, who I am, how I look, how things are. It's like, I can't be happy yet until it's like who I am now is not good enough. It's like that underlying core belief of like, I'm not good enough. Like I'm not perfect enough. I need to be perfect, or I need to, something's inherently faulty with me. No.
Oh, okay. So let's try to go, I guess, maybe more on a positive route, because I feel like, before we kind of go positive, I guess can you maybe rattle off some clear indicators that someone might be struggling with an eating disorder, like some things that they might be doing? Because like you said before, sometimes it's confusing when you go on social media. A lot of what's depicted in the media is considered healthy, quote unquote. And so I feel like maybe people just need some clarity on like, when are they engaging in healthy habits and behaviors versus unhealthy habits and behaviors?
Sure. So if there's this fixation in your mind on like calorie counting, so if everything you're eating, you're kind of mentally calculating all the time, that might be a clue. if you are finding yourself, your whole entire day is consumed with thoughts and behaviors around food, exercise, like, you're constantly consumed with it. I'll ask people, like, how much of your day is spent thinking about food or your body or like exercise, your weight, all that? And they'll say like 80, 90%. I can't stop thinking about it. It's like, that's a clue. That's a lot. And going along with that, if you're missing major events or like, let's say you get invited to dinner or something and you're like, oh my gosh, no, I can't go. I have to go to the gym. Or you skip class, say you're a student and you're like, no, I'm not going to go to class because I didn't get up early enough to go to the gym. So I got to go to the gym instead. Or you miss work or obligations. Like, you're missing out on your life because you have to fit in time at the gym or your eating disorder rituals and behaviors, which, people tend to have. They don't realize they're having them. So, they got to like be at home and meal prep or, oh no, I can't go because I ate X this morning for breakfast. So I was quote unquote bad. So now I call it negotiating with their eating disorder. I ate this earlier. So now I can't go to dinner because I have to be quote unquote good the rest of the day. So I can't go to dinner. I got to stay home and like eat my meal or whatever it is. So if there's things like that happening where it's like, you're not engaging in life because you have to fit in these things to maintain your calorie count or your exercise regimen, like there's something wrong. Like same thing, like you have to wake up super, super early to fit in gym time. Something's off.
Yeah. And it's not like you really want to, it's like you feel like you have to. It's like a pressure and it's like there's and I think at the end of the day, like for some people, they might be hearing that and be like, well, no, but I thought like, that's the only time I can go. Okay. If that's the only time you can go and it makes you feel good and you're doing it because you love the way your body feels, it's very different from feeling like you have to go. And if you don't go, you did a bad thing and it needs to be a certain amount of hours and you need to break a certain amount of sweat or burn a certain amount of calories, right? Like, I feel like you said, like if it's taking up the majority of your brain space and it's, you're obsessing over it and thinking about it constantly, that's a very big difference between like, making it fit in the mornings because that's the time you work out. Like it's a very different, I think, mindset behind it,
Well, yeah, exactly what you said. It's like, I'll hear people say like, if I don't go, I feel guilty. If I go, I can earn my food for the rest of the day. If I don't go, then it alters what I eat for the rest of the day. Or I'm in a really bad mood if I don't go. If these kinds of things, if anybody listening is kind of going, yeah, like that's something. You don't earn your food by working out. Right. You don't like need to alter what you eat the rest of the day because you didn't.
Yeah, definitely. So I have one question. I don't know, it might be hard to answer, but I feel like for those who get really deep in their eating disorder and they, like you said, they kind of start to, not even on purpose, but because their eating disorder is taking over, cut out quality time with family, friends. They start to isolate themselves, right? Because they become so obsessed with their routine that that's kind of all they know. And it's, they lose touch with friends and family. So they almost created it on purpose, but the eating disorder created like, that's almost like the only thing they have. Right. And so how do you go about helping someone to, when they say, like, because I've had clients before where they'll say something to me like, well, like, there's nobody else to hang out with, or there's nothing else to do. And it's like, they can't even think past go because they've put themselves in such this whole, it's like, they don't even have a deep why of why they want to heal because they almost feel like they don't really have, it's sad, but like anyone or anything to really heal for. Right. Like, so how do you get someone to start to see that if they can just push through and work and heal, that those, that there is a life beyond just obsessing over what to eat, how much to eat, and when to work out?
Well, and again, I think it's individual. It's like, did they distance themselves from people because they were toxic relationships that weren't healthy for them to begin with? And so the thought of like letting go of the eating disorder is just, oh, I'm going to go back into toxic relationships. Is it that, or is it, okay, because it is true when you are really knee deep in the eating disorder, that is a consequence, is you do isolate and you do unfortunately, sometimes relationships do, kind of crumble, or, people get out of your life. And so you might need to really think about, how can I mend those friendships, relationships? Is it possible? If you're open with people, sometimes, really having that discussion of like, hey, this is what I've been struggling with. And you can mend those fences. But a lot of times it is kind of a grieving process of all the consequences that the eating disorder has caused in your life. And sometimes it is relationships that, break up.
Yeah.
But to your point, like to your question, like it is actually, that's the discussion, is what has the eating disorder taken from you? Right. And then realizing like, okay, so what do you want your life to look like?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times it's realizing like, wow, it's taken a lot from me. I don't want it to take anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh man. Oh, gosh. And it's just crazy because eating disorders are so common. And I feel like diet culture just like hides it all.
Well, yeah. And that's what kills me too, is like diet culture gives this idea that like, oh, you're going to be so happy. You're going to have this great life. You're going to be valued and adored, and everything's going to be fantastic if you look this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, these images that are out there, they're unrealistic, they're unattainable, and the path to getting there, again, unattainable. The path to getting there is hell, right?
Yeah, and you're trapped. Then you're trapped. Like you're trapped. You're either going to have to keep working that hard forever, which nobody can, because eventually we burn out, or your body will burn out for you.
Yeah.
It just, your bodies are not supposed to be, doing all the things it requires to get to look a certain way, like that super quote unquote, like, I don't want to say quote unquote, like a leaner look, because you're decreasing your body fat significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and everyone's body is built differently. So maybe someone who is naturally is on a smaller frame, and like, maybe they have a smaller, like they have a lower BMI, like to get to that point, maybe not super hard for them. But I know someone like me who grew up overweight her whole life, when I tried to get my BMI to be in the quote unquote normal category, which we can talk about as how that's not helpful either. And I finally got there. My body shut down on me. I developed so many different illnesses because my body was like, you are stressing me out. Like, this is not what you're supposed to be. This is not what I know society tells you this is what you're supposed to look like, but you are not supposed to be this way. I do not like you right now. My body literally shut down on me. It was like, no, not happening.
Right? That's what people aren't talking about. I could go off on the BMI. That's a whole nother show, but like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? That is not a measure of health at all. No, please.
Yeah.
No. Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah, not at all. But okay. So I guess, and how long have you been doing this work? Because I feel like you have so many different experiences, and how long have you been doing this work so far?
My goodness, I'm aging myself now. Thanks, Tony.
Sorry.
Oh gosh. Well, I thought about the other day. The first patient I saw was 28 years ago, but again, I waited some time to specialize. So it's probably been a good 20 some odd years. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of years. So the reason why I asked that is because I know you have a lot of experience. I know you've worked with a lot of clients. You mentioned your self-healing, but I think that, when, for whatever reason, when we're the professionals who healed, it doesn't, I don't know. It's like, well, you can do it, but I can't do it. Let's talk about some of your patients who have made a full recovery. What were their characteristics in maybe their methods, or their just character traits, or just like what made it possible, in your opinion, what made it possible for those people to heal and make a full recovery?
Well, I'm going to say this part too, and the research actually supports this, that if you get in sooner and when you're younger, that helps. That I've seen across the board. So the younger and sooner symptoms start.
Early intervention.
Right. Also, people who have supportive social networks, so supportive family, supportive friends. That helps immensely because it really is detrimental if people are going home to people who also maybe have eating disorders or giving negative messages or not supportive. That's hard. That's really hard. Also, just say people who are, so we have this thing like, we look at like how motivated people are when they come in. And so sometimes I'll just assess, like, are they in the contemplation stage, pre-contemplation, like where's somebody at, right? And the best way to kind of think about that is like, if I get somebody who's like court mandated, say, for therapy, they're not very motivated. They're just there to check off the box. I got to do my 10 sessions and like, I'm done, right?
Right.
They're just sitting there. That's not somebody who's very motivated to change, right? So if somebody just comes in, they're like not really buying into therapy. They're just kind of sitting there like, I'm not sure about it. That's different than somebody who's like, I really want to get better. Like maybe like for me, instance, right? I wasn't all that motivated initially. Once I had a scare that was really like, okay, my life is on the line here. I was really motivated. Like there was a huge difference of motivation. I was in it. I was like, let's go. So I think that makes a difference too. Like, where's the person when they come in?
Yeah. So, okay. Early intervention, support system, and that true desire to want to change, not just doing it because you think you're supposed to or someone's telling you to. Understood. Amazing. Okay. Any other tidbits, comments, anything else you want to share with the listeners before you wrap up today?
You know, I think, again, there's so many myths out there about eating disorders. If anyone is out there thinking they're a failure, you know, the goal is weight loss for treatment. I hear this all the time. People get discouraged. Again, going back to the support system, people will often get so discouraged. They're like, well, you know, people tell me treatment's not working because I'm not losing weight. Listen, that's not the goal of therapy.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean therapy's not working. That is society, diet, culture talking. We have a $76 billion diet and beauty industry out there that is louder.
Yeah, your progress of healing your eating disorder should not be weight related.
Thank you.
And here's the other thing too, like Cristina, I hear this, and I've also, you know, my first, before I did my own private practice, my very first job was in an eating disorder center, and I feel like the old methodologies are like tracking for people with like severe anorexia. And listen, people can struggle with anorexia of all shapes and sizes.
Thank you.
Which is we know this. The ones, then there's some that are they actually are significantly underweight. And so I feel like they track weight gain as progress. And I see that and I understand that, but I still don't think that should be the form of measure for progress. You know, you really, because you can't make the scale part of the equation. That's one of the things you said in the very beginning, which I feel like depending on the treatment center, the scale might be part of the equation. And I agree with you. I think with healing, I think that even if I understand, like sometimes for people who are severely underweight, like, yes, you want to know that they're gaining weight to show they're getting enough nourishment because maybe they're hiding their food or not being honest with you about what they did eat. But I still feel like if it can be avoided, it's going to be more helpful to just look at the habits, the behaviors, and like trust that the person's telling you that they ate or didn't eat. Because like you said, if they want to heal, they're going to heal. And if they don't, they're not going to heal. So I feel like putting the scale part of the equation is not really helpful in either, despite the size of the person or the eating disorder.
Right. And to this point too, like you cannot look at anybody and know if they have an eating disorder or which eating disorder they have. So that myth needs to be broken right now. Like you just cannot. So that's that myth out there that you can look at somebody and know either if they're physically healthy or not, or if they have an eating disorder or not, or which one they have, like that needs to be broken. Like I will say that very loud all the time. Like I wish that would just go away.
Yeah.
So I think that's the weight bias is a big barrier to healthcare and to
Definitely. And the world.
Yes.
And the world. Okay. So where can people find you, connect with you, follow up with any questions if they have them?
So I'm on Instagram, Behind the Bite podcast. I also have the podcast on like iTunes, Spotify, all that. And then my private practice website is Freedom to Wellness.
Love it. All right. So I'll put all that in the show notes. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Cristina. If you guys have any questions for me, reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, take a screenshot of it, share it on your story, tag us on Instagram. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, definitely hit that subscribe button. A new episode comes out every Tuesday and Thursday. And when you're subscribed, you don't miss a beat. All right, that's it from me today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm Toni Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.